welcome to the SSI Orbit podcast, a forum for conversations that explore the ever-growing ecosystems of self-sovereign identity. And I'm your host, Mathieu Claude. So on the previous podcast that we did together, Riley, you made a comment that I was going back to listen to it just because it felt like after it's been over a year, I think, since we've done that, but it just felt like a good moment to continue upon that conversation, which we talked a lot about adoption of self-sovereign identity or decentralized identity at that time. And one of the comments you had made on that podcast is you've never talked to anyone in your life who has questioned the value of SSI. And the question is always, how do you get to that point? Do you still feel like that statement is true today? And do you feel like we've pushed the adoption cycle a bit further since when we last spoke?
I think that statement is true if by never talked to anyone in my life, you mean never talked to anyone normal in my life or something, I look at people like you and I don't think of us as like normal per se, because we care a lot about all the details of how SSI is implemented. And, we are very deep in the space, I guess. We are identity people. And I think that there, in the last couple of years, there have been some additional kind of perspectives that are really helpful talking about some of the potential risks of self-sovereign identity. I think a lot of those risks can be mitigated, and some of them may not, I don't want to say unfounded, but may be overblown. But regardless, I think in general the point still stands, which is that as I talk to people in business, as I talk to regular everyday consumers or whatever, that point very much still stands. As far as adoption is concerned, I definitely, we've definitely pushed the adoption cycle forward a little bit, right? I mean, I'm sort of impatient, so I am always wishing that it would go faster. I'm always asking the question, how can we, how could we, what could we do to help more people obtain a digital wallet and help more people get access to the things they need easier, safer, etc. So I'm always wishing for more, but we've definitely made a lot of progress since we last spoke.
One of the promising things I thought recently, just from the experience at the last IAW not too long ago, was that there's a lot of the conversation, I've mentioned this a few times, but a lot of the conversation seems to be moving beyond technology, beyond the trust triangle, and really talking about governance and talking about how do I trust certain things, just moving beyond that simple credential exchange or just being able to show a credential go from point A to point B. Do you see these things or other things as good signs that, hey, there's much more than just showing a demo of a credential moving around and showing interoperability, and that makes us all happy? For
sure. I think I kind of have two perspectives here. The first one is I actually think that the trust triangle is not complete, in the sense that I don't think you can just have a trust triangle and have it work in the real world. And so what I mean by trust triangle, obviously is issuer gives a credential to a holder. The holder presents it to a verifier. The verifier checks the cryptography to confirm that the credential is valid and came from the right issuer. The challenge is, in the real world, verifiers will not keep lists of the, hundreds, thousands, or, even hundreds of thousands in some cases of issuers that they want to trust, right? I think the trust triangle is a great proof of concept, but in reality, I think every case where this happens in the real world, you'll need a fourth kind of, conceptually at least, a fourth party or role in that ecosystem. And so I think that the conversations around governance and around trust registries and things like that are, I guess my perspective, at IIW in the past, a session that I called a few years ago was the trust triangle is incomplete, and the conversation was around like, actually, it's just not a complete model. We need a fourth party, and we need it to be a first-class citizen, not an afterthought. And I think like, you could argue that the VC data model adds a fourth role, which is the verifiable data registry, and that governance can play a role, or conceptually you could kind of group those things together. I think in the past, a lot of people have just thought of that as a blockchain, and since then we've learned that just throwing a blockchain there is not enough. So I guess my first perspective is that the conversations around governance and trust and things like that are really just an extension of the conversations that people were having around the trust triangle, right? It's just rounding it out and completing it in my view. But I think my second perspective here is that I think that people have sort of been realizing that the blocker or the big challenge, the big thing to solve is not those roles in the trust triangle, right? Or trust to diamond, or whatever you want to call it. The big challenge and unsolved problem is not technology. So that's where I think a lot of people are, there's a lot of conversation around things like governance, like you mentioned, but also business models, use cases, products, and the like.
You've done a bit of thinking, and it was published in a blog post just, again, along the topic of the opportunities in SSI and adoption in SSI. And you kind of distinguished different types of personas or different types of organizations or stakeholders within an ecosystem, just trying to see where will adoption happen more rapidly than other areas. And so you could think about governments being in there. You could think about technology companies. You could think about enterprises. It would be interesting to hear kind of how you came up with this analysis and how you were able to split up these different parties in a quadrant kind of model. And then what were some of the learnings that you took from that?
Just to recap, the quadrants is sort of a 2x2 matrix where in one dimension you have organizations versus consumers. And on the other axis, you have top down versus bottoms up. When I've tried to analyze how past technologies have been adopted and what can we learn from those things as it relates to SSI, this is just sort of, I guess, a way that I was able to kind of group some of these adoption cycles together. I'm trying to remember how I necessarily landed on this in particular, but I guess the concept is that some technologies like Bitcoin, are really driven by people and are driven kind of bottoms up. So they spread virally through communities and people, and it's really people that turn this into a reality. And then it's up to the sort of businesses to later then decide to accept Bitcoin, for example. But businesses were not the initial driver of Bitcoin. On the other hand, we see things like the Visa network, maybe as an example, where you could make an argument that was really organizations driving that. It was Bank of America issuing credit, and Bank of America recruited a whole bunch of verifiers, essentially, or merchants to accept that credit. And they just issued a whole bunch of credit cards to a whole bunch of people to seed the market. And it was really, and the value proposition was like, hey, you can go to any of these merchants and you can just buy stuff with this card. And so it was really driven by Bank of America wanting to extend their existing business of lending money into, this new medium of credit cards. And of course, that was the start of what we now know as Visa. And so, you could think about technology being adopted in terms of, again, top down from organizations and things like that, or bottoms up. And I think the thing that I hear most, there's sort of two quadrants there that I hear a lot about. The first one is people looking to get SSI adopted via people and communities, and sort of driven by people and driven in a bottoms up fashion. And that worked for Bitcoin. It is a lot of the driving force behind DAOs and NFTs. And so, of course, a lot of the kind of people who have a proclivity toward decentralization maybe are more likely to adopt something like SSI, and therefore we see sort of activity in the Web3 space or in other communities to adopt SSI. That's one approach that I've seen. And I think that model is, I'd love to see that happen. I would be an early adopter. I think the challenge with that model is that trust in the real world, like the way that trust works, like if I walk into a bank, it doesn't really matter if I have 25 people vouch for me. What matters is that I have a piece of plastic given to me by the government so that I can open a bank account, right? If I, same thing when I want to get a job, right? It doesn't really matter if 25 classmates of mine who I went to college with vouch for me that I was a good student. Like what matters is that I show them my transcript or diploma or something, and I prove that I have this certification. And so I think that just the utility is, creating trust, establishing trust usually comes from some trusted third party. That's how most of the real world things work. So I think there are interesting use cases that I've seen in this sort of community user driven approach. And I'm excited to see if someone can crack the code there, but I think it does have some challenges. The other quadrant that I see a lot of activity in or discussion about in the SSI space is the organization-driven top-down quadrant. That is the quadrant that, talks about governments adopting. It talks about big enterprises adopting. And it's like, wow, if we could just get one enterprise to adopt this and then roll it out to 5 million users, then that would seed the market, and wouldn't that be so great? And that's clearly the best way to get adoption here, right? And that's or so the story goes. And so we've seen a lot of people in the ecosystem targeting these. I think Timothy Ruff in the past has called it the queen bees. So it's like this queen bee strategy where you can get one big player and then build an ecosystem around that player. And again, I think similarly, I think it is clearly has merits. Clearly, many technologies have been adopted this way. But I think when it comes to SSI, it's just slow. That's just the short answer, right? It's just like I started my career in the SSI space at Sovereign Foundation 5 years ago. And I remember when in my interview, when I was, before I even started there, I was hearing about how credit unions were going to get, we're going to roll this out to millions and millions of users. And anyway, I got sold these big visions of like all these queen bees that were coming on board and going to begin using SSI. I think the challenge, though, is that things just move a lot more slowly than people expect, right? Banks are not exactly known for their speed, and rightfully so, right? They're protecting people's money and they're custodians of people's savings and all of that. And so I think that model will be an important driver of SSI adoption. But my argument in the blog post and the one I'll make here is that I don't want to wait around for that. And I think that there's another quadrant that's maybe a little bit more exciting in the near term, and that we at Trinsic are seeing more adoption sort of coming from. And that quadrant is the quadrant that is organization driven but bottoms up. And what I mean by that is that, short version of that is like startups, right? Startups are an organization, they're a team of people, and they are creating some new product and trying to get it adopted from scratch, as opposed to just digitizing an existing process and rolling it out automatically to millions of people. And that's why I call it bottoms up. But and whether it is an actual, startup per se, or whether it is a small sort of innovation team at a big company, that matters less. The point is that it's sort of building a new product.
It's been interesting to see adoption of certain technologies, like let's just say certain productivity technologies, like Slack being an example where they were able to create an ecosystem of users kind of bottom up, and eventually it kind of moves as more and more, because everyone working for an organization is a consumer anyways. So starting bottom up, and then eventually you get to kind of the more enterprise use cases or enterprise deployments. The other interesting topic is just there's existing governance kind of on that top down layer. If you're referring to governments or enterprises, like the Visa governance is a good use case for this, where it's existing trust today that just works and is top down, versus if you want to start bottom up, you could get talking about reputation or perhaps working with a third party that's going to be driving governance. So that is interesting as well, just to see how that kind of happens. But so then the way you're looking at it is, if you're selling to that quadrant, which they're early adopters. They're like us. They're either building for enterprise or they're building for bottom up Web3, whatever you want to call it. But is it just about equipping kind of what makes them push adoption quicker than just going directly to an end enterprise customer, or just to a DAO that's just trying to build a new system from the bottom up?
So this question is, I'm glad you asked it. I think the short answer to this question is incentives. It's like, if a startup is setting out to solve a problem, regardless of what that is, it is like existential to that startup that they build a product that actually solves that problem, right? I mean, and like you say, right? Like suppose for a moment that Visa is looking into this. Worst case scenario, it doesn't work, or it's not optimal, or it doesn't work 10 times better than what they currently have. that's kind of probably fine because they already have something that works. And a lot of these governments, it's like, of course they want to make citizen experience better, but like they kind of already have something that exists right now and works reasonably well. I mean, of course, it could be improved in many ways, but I don't know. I went to the DMV and got my driver's license, and it was kind of painful, but like it worked. But with these sort of organization driven, bottoms up kind of net new problems to be solved using SSI, if they don't solve the problem, they cease to exist. Their company doesn't work and they go out of business or whatever. So, I mean, it is just, from what I've seen, it's just really, really important to these companies that they get it right and that they solve it. And so there's just a different level of drive, ambition, motivation, incentive, whatever you want to call it, for them to succeed and to get customers, right? And to get revenue in the door and all of that. And so I think that's the short answer.
I was about to move into incentives, talking about not necessarily these bottom-up companies building identity technology products, but more incentives from an enterprise perspective. One of the biggest benefits altogether that these standards, these technologies, call it SSI, brings is just the power of owning the relationships and being able to have portable relationships and to bring it with you. It's not good enough if you are locked into a platform like Facebook or stuff like that you ask them to delete your data. You lose all the relationships you have on there, and you can't keep those. And relationships are about trust. These things grow over time. So being stuck within a single environment kind of limits value to the end consumer. And for enterprises, they see their relationships with their customers and employees as their key assets, right? And they're fiercely protective of them. And so, changing your mindset this is a fundamental change in a mindset of basically not having a walled garden and control over your relationship. So that's where I often see a struggle with enterprises, just to think from that perspective, and sometimes thinking like, well, they don't have any incentive, or they don't see the reason why they should be issuing credentials to their customers or to their employers and to their employees, yes, and such, to use within an ecosystem. We all agree that it's gonna create value for the ecosystem, but that incentive is just it's inexistent today.
So I might sound like a broken record a little bit on this podcast with some of these answers, so forgive me if I do. And you can poke and prod on these if you feel like it's needed. But the answer that the kind of response that I have to that is that I think the incentive seems like it's not there because the problem is not being framed in a way that they resonate with. What I mean by that is that if you're trying, it sounds like if you're talking to an issuer, for example, and they don't see why they should be issuing credentials, they don't see why they should, the unlock their data for users or let their hand off of the sort of leash or whatever of their consumer relationships or whatever. I think that it's because those are not the right things to be selling to these enterprises. I think you got to solve a problem for them that they feel, and that's when they will buy something to solve that problem. This is all to say that I think the key is building a product that solves a real problem for these companies. And if the problem's not there, then of course there's no incentive to adopt. I have seen, though, problems that companies face that I don't want to say that SSI can solve. And we can maybe talk about terminology a little bit later. SSI is a concept, right? It's an ideal, it's an ambition, it's an end state that we hope to get to. But what is not a concept, what is not an end state or an ideal, is a product, right? A company can buy a product. They can't really buy self-sovereign identity per se. And the product that they are sold needs to solve a real problem for them. And the only, the incentive that a company has, in my view, to adopt an SSI powered product is the same incentive that they have to buy any other product that they use, whether they use, I don't know, they're using Dropbox to store their files. Why are they doing that? It's because they have a problem related to collaborating on stored documents and files, and they bought a problem to solve that problem for them. If you want an issuer to start issuing verifiable credentials, you've got to find some pain point in their current processes, some cost center, some time that they're wasting, something. Then you've got to build a product to solve that problem for them in a way that is evident that it actually solves the problem. And then you sell them the product. You don't sell them the technology. You know what I mean? Trying to sell them the technology is just talking past them. Like in my view, in an ideal world, what I've seen be successful is when companies sell a product to a company, and the only time they're talking about self-sovereign identity and verifiable credentials and cryptography and decentralized identifiers and stuff is in the sort of IT diligence rubber stamp that they need to get it into production. But hopefully the like vast majority of the conversation is surrounding like solving a real problem for the company. And sometimes, these like, hey, it's built using decentralized identity. So you get some like zero trust capabilities, you get interoperability out of the box. Like there are maybe some benefits that you could sort of allude to, but I have not seen those things be the key driver or key incentivizer of companies adopting SSI.
Which kind of leads you to think that the trust triangle or trust diamond is just deceptive, to think that this is kind of the model that's going to lead to any real adoption. And then like,
yes,
you use Dropbox or use Slack earlier, you're not buying some internet product, you're buying like a functional product that solves a problem. I'm not buying internet, just like I like that comparison. You're not buying self-sovereign identity. I feel sometimes too, like, I guess there's different paths towards using these technologies underneath a product that will lead to adoption. And these paths or these products, maybe we'll just start talking about the products, are going to be a little bit different perhaps for organizations that are moving from, call it Web 1 or physical world to a digital world. They could be different products for companies moving from kind of a Web 2 internet world to this, and perhaps different for ones that are just starting bottom up native like that. But I feel like often, and we'll get to terminology in a couple of minutes because I think that's an important conversation, but I feel like we often just try to draw comparisons to real world products that exist and just try to frame it in a digital space. And so we see a lot of just like wallets being used in demonstrations. Honestly, every credential issuance verification system looks the same thing. It's just like a very simple web-based application that doesn't look like an end product. It just looks like it allows you to do certain technical functions. But so to your comment of like, we need to be talking more products and less about these ideals, I would like to see less wallets, because I feel like selling wallets and talking about how these digital wallets help you do what you're doing in the physical world in a digital world, I don't think it really helps the story. It still doesn't solve a business problem for someone. Just I have a wallet. First of all, it's not the same thing as like a physical world wallet, and we could talk about that, why that's not a good comparison. But if you're selling wallets and you're selling issuance platforms and stuff like that, it doesn't fit into the whole premise that you need to be selling products. You're not selling SSI. You're not selling internet and products. And I feel like selling wallets, selling credential management platforms kind of fits inside the same bucket.
Yeah, I agree. And I really like that perspective. We can do this later as well, but I would love to hear, you unpack that position about how digital wallets maybe are not, comparing them to physical wallets maybe isn't very productive or accurate. I'd love to hear you unpack that.
I think there's room for a digital version of the physical wallet, and that is a product on its own. But you don't need to have 100 wallets. Like, I don't have 100 physical wallets. I'm going to be using the capabilities of these things digitally across different applications. And we could get into, am I going to be using agent technology versus wallets and where they're going to be type of thing. But I think there's differences in how you own and how you control your physical wallets versus digitally. But I think like an Apple wallet or a Google wallet, whatever they call their product, is a product. And it works as intended, right? Whereas all these wallets that are out there today, they're not solving that same problem, or you don't need multiple of these things. You could have different versions of it. It's going to be a long tail distribution of these products. But I think wallet is just not the right framing for what it's doing within other products. Like it's not the product on its own, other than
Yeah.
there's going to be a few of them.
Yeah. So it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is that, we've got like Apple and Google Wallet products, and those are productized and adopted and everything. But you're sort of alluding to this like proliferation of other SSI wallets or whatever, that there are so many of them now that it wouldn't make sense for people to have like one wallet for their like education credentials, and a different wallet for their health credentials, and a different wallet for their whatever, and end up with lots and lots of wallets. Is that kind of where you're going?
It's just they're not good products. It's not a good product. Like my physical wallet, my one physical wallet is a good product because it allows me to store money and identity cards and stuff like that. We could argue whether or not like you should go with an Apple, Google, or other solutions. That's just a whole other discussion. But the point I'm, I guess, trying to get across is you're not selling internet when you're selling Dropbox. You shouldn't be selling self-sovereign identity when you're selling an end product that uses that. Selling a wallet is kind of the same thing. It fits into, it should not be the end product unless we're just talking about those wallets.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that perspective. I think in my experience at Trinsic, we started as a wallet company. In fact, our first product was the Trinsic wallet, or at the time it was called the Street Cred wallet. So that's where we started. And so I have, I've been through a lot of cycles of thinking about this. And where we've ended up is that, we still have our Trinsic wallet in the App Store. It is mostly used as a demo tool or a demonstration product, basically, or a developer utility. But our product that we sell now is, we call it a wallet SDK. Maybe there's a better term for it, but really it is the ability to embed those capabilities into existing products and flows in a way that sometimes is completely hidden from the user. Like the user doesn't necessarily need to know all that's going on under the hood. Like ideally, they should know what the guarantees are. They should know that their data is not going to be, sold. That their data is secure, right? Obviously, there's some high level things, but in terms of like the specific standards or interacting directly with the verifiable credentials themselves, in some products, that's just not a good user experience. And particularly, and here's where my take might get a little spicier, particularly asking users to download an additional wallet, a third-party product, so that they if some enterprise is never going to redirect their users to go download some, forgive me, but no-name startups, wallet from the App Store, have them scan like 6 QR codes and wait 25 seconds to before they can get their credentials, so that they can go scan more QR codes to create connections so that they can get verified, and then they can that whole experience that exists in so many of the demos that we see is, again, forgive the hot take here, but that's never going to get adopted in my mind. That's not going to work. And this is where we came from, right? This is like the product that we built at Trinsic, and that we have a lot of experience seeing how people, seeing the reception, and it's just not up to the level of product experience that people expect, and nor is it to the level that enterprises are going to want to see. Enterprises want to adopt things that will improve conversion rates and make user experience easier, not harder. And so you get this challenge where, of course, once someone already has an SSI wallet with all those connections and credentials and whatever else in it, the user experience can be good thereafter. But that initial onboarding step is a huge barrier, and it's I think part of why we haven't seen nearly as much adoption as we could have. So today at Trinsic, what we offer is a wallet SDK that, again, can be embedded into existing products and solutions. It can be, you can display it to the user like what you would think of as an identity wallet, or you could hide a lot of that functionality from the user. Obviously, we can get into sort of some of the idealism versus practicality arguments here, because there are trade-offs that you make in an approach like that. But again, if we could build the most elegant technology in the entire world, but if it doesn't get adopted, then I would worry about, sort of maybe isn't the best use of my time if I'm going to build super elegant technology that ends up not actually impacting, people's lives very much. And so our North Star is thinking about the kinds of products that will get adopted, and that's, what we've seen work so far. So happy to unpack that, but I really agree with you on the wallet piece.
Yeah, and you know what, we as a Northern Block as a company have our own wallet products as well, and it's not something I guess I won't categorize it as a product today. It could become a product. It could help people use it to build their own products similarly to you all. But yeah, I think elements like governance, I mentioned earlier in the conversation, these conversations are good and need to happen because there needs to just be that structure if you're going to create certain trust tasks. But at the end of the day, the biggest from, I guess, if I was to summarize from both of our points, the biggest thing in the way of adoption is just good user experience and good products. And seeing demos over and over again of credential exchanges and these things happening, these are not products at this stage that end users are going to interact with.
Yeah. I mean, that said, I have seen good products be built using verifiable credentials and, products that have gotten adoption. And the sort of key takeaway there is that like probably the single biggest predictor, and as terms of, we're a developer tool for implementing the stuff we're talking about here, right? So we see a wide breadth, we see hundreds of attempts. We don't go very deep into each one because we're a developer tool, right? And so we're not super hands-on with each customer, but we see a lot of attempts. And one of the key, really, like probably the single biggest predictor of success of any of those attempts is the level of product execution that they bring to the table, which includes, again, user experience, but it also includes business model. It includes the subset of a market that you're tackling, the problem that you're solving, right? These are all product related problems. And I would say that is the single biggest predictor of success for an SSI approach.
People sometimes underestimate the power of good branding and good positioning. I think one of the challenges with any new technology is there's no shared vocabulary. And so having a shared vocabulary is an easy way to communicate something. Like if we both know what a newspaper is, for example, it's pretty straightforward. There's a great deal of context that we both have and shared knowledge we have about what that is. Certain technology companies have done good jobs at that as well. If you look at like Facebook as a product, and they've really named their features in their product according to what they do. Like newsfeed is pretty straightforward to know what it does for you. That's one thing I feel like companies like that have done quite well, or Facebook in particular in this scenario. How important is setting the right language for what we're doing here? We talk about decentralized ID, we talk about SSI, we talk about Web5, we talk about ID tech, which maybe you could explain a little bit more. But how important is this definition to adoption and understanding of what this all is?
I think that the single most important thing as it relates to terminology is to use the right terms for the right things with the right audience. So I think it's less about the term itself, although that matters too. But I think it's more about, like, again, the audience you're talking to. If you start talking about Web5 to the everyday consumer, that's probably not an approach, a winning approach, right? So anyway, that's the first kind of comment I'll make. The other thing I'll say is that I used to use the term self-sovereign identity, or SSI, to refer to basically everything that I could, right? It was like self-sovereign identity meant the technology. It meant verifiable credentials and decentralized identifiers and blockchain and wallets and everything else. Self-sovereign identity referred to the product experiences. It referred to the conceptual kind of like requirements of like, well, is this self-sovereign enough or is it not, or like whatever. And it referred to so many things for me that I found that it was just such a diluted word. And especially, and I would use it with like every audience, and some audiences, particularly ones that were already had a proclivity toward decentralization, were really excited about the term self-sovereign identity. Maybe in their minds, they were thinking about self-sovereign money, and they're already self-custodying or self-custodying Bitcoin or something like that. And so their mind automatically, appreciates this term. But others, like people in government or people in just everyday people, maybe had a different reception. And so again, what I think is just using the right term for the right things. The term ID tech is a term that we've started using to refer to a specific piece of this puzzle, and that is the product layer, right? It's sort of, in the past, people would say the application layer of SSI, which to me is like, it means something to us people who think about technology in terms of layers. But if I go to somebody and say like, the application layer of the internet, like most non-technical people will be like, a layer? What? What are you like? What are you talking about here, right? And so yeah, I mean, we needed a better word to talk about products that are built and powered by this new identity technology. And as we were trying to figure out what that term might be, we started using ID tech internally as sort of a play on like fintech, medtech, ag tech, ed tech, right? All these sort of existing terms like that, and started using it more. And the more we used it, the more it was catching on internally, and we started using it with customers, and they started using it. And so anyway, now we've started using it more publicly, and I think that it solves a bit of a niche problem in terms of terminology, right? In describing the product bit of the stack.
Sounds like a better framing on what the category could possibly be. Like if you say ID tech, it sounds like anyone could pretty much just guess that it's technology to do with identity. At least as a starter, that like it puts you inside a frame, and then you could start going deeper. But as a category, I think it's quite interesting, and I'm wondering if you're thinking about trademarking it.
I'm definitely not trying to trademark it. It is not. It's not a. It's not the intent is for it to not be a trinsic word. The intent is for it to be, again, used more broadly. So I would not want to trademark it.
I was just playing off of the Web5 stuff that happened recently.
That was quite something. So yeah.
How do you feel about that? And maybe you could explain kind of what happened for listeners there, and then if we agree that ID tech is good for a category, you could explain what happened with Web5, what it is, but do you see Web5 as being a good representation of something?
Historically, decentralized identity has always been the sort of neglected cousin of Web3. It's like kind of, some people thought it was like part of Web3, but it was really, again, sort of neglected or ignored by most of the community there. The Web3 community has its own challenges, obviously, and it has sort of elements that people want to disassociate themselves from. And so Block, formerly known as Square, when they sort of made their announcement of their investment in self-sovereign identity, they called it Web 5 as a way to sort of, I think first as like a joke, because the joke was like, man, like who are these people to just like pick their favorite technology and just declare it as the next generation of the web? Like the Internet of Things could, arguably was like a next generation internet or something, or I don't know. There are lots of technologies that are really cool and augmented the internet as we knew it, but none of them just self-declared themselves as like the thing. And so I think part of it was like a joke or a meme to sort of poke fun at like how the sort of blockchain community maybe asserted something that Block wasn't a fan of. So that's the history of it. I think then people started using the Web5 term to run things like scams or whatever. And so the Block decided, we don't want people using our term to scam people. That's sort of the whole reason we wanted to like invent this term, is like Web3 has a lot of scams in it, and we wanted to disassociate ourselves from that. And so they decided to trademark the term Web5. They announced the trade that they were doing that. And then, there was some pushback on Twitter from myself and from others. And we had a dialogue with essentially the senior leadership there over that project at Block. And then a few hours later, they decided to reverse that decision to trademark the term, at least reverse the sort of, I think they're going to go back and like reevaluate. They still may trademark it at some point, but at least they're holding off for now. I was hopeful that the term Web 5 could be used for SSI in a similar way that Web 3 is used in the blockchain ecosystem. When somebody says they built a product, a Web 3 product, or a product using Web 3.0 or something like that, what do you think of? You instantly think of blockchain, maybe NFTs, maybe tokens, maybe DAOs, maybe, whatever, but you think of this ecosystem of sort of, you think of some technologies, really, is what you think of. Maybe you think of a paradigm or a way of, or an architecture for building applications. I think like Web 5 could be a pretty cool way to represent that for SSI. Or in other words, I've started using Web 5, and when I use the term Web 5, what I mean is essentially it's I use it as shorthand for verifiable credentials, decentralized identifiers, personal data stores like wallets or decentralized web nodes, interaction protocols like DIDCOM, or some of the new OIDC protocols or whatever, right? But like when I say Web 5, I'm like talking about that set of technologies and or a paradigm for building products where consumers can have authentic control control over authentic data and relationships or whatever about them. And I think it could be a cool term. Who knows if it'll get adopted? I think the reason I like it is because it is totally meaningless. And it's like, and so therefore we can like create whatever meaning we want for it. That's also, of course, a downside because, if it's meaningless, then it takes some explanation and it takes some, So anyway, we'll see where it goes. But yeah, that's the story. I was not a fan of the idea of block trademarking it because I want to use it as, for my product, and I wouldn't want some commercial entity to say, oh, that's not actually Web 5 enough for us. So like Carry, for example, if you're using Carry, well, that's not actually Web 5 because you need to use Ion DIDs or something like that, or whatever, right? And I'm not saying that Block would do that, but I'm saying that the idea that some commercial entity could do that would, in my opinion, kill the term for use by the community in that way. So yeah, we'll see.
I could see why some organizations get scared with hearing words like sovereignty and self-sovereign identity. Kind of went through the same path, being in before it was called Web3, being in the crypto space, like talking about crypto you didn't want to do. So you started talking about blockchains, and then blockchain became a bad word and because it was kind of scary. So you started talking about ledgers. But I think with self-sovereign identity, like at the end of the day, like whether you're a nation state, whether you're an organization, whether you're an individual, these things give you a path to more sovereignty in your context, right? I think that's the whole ethos of the crypto or Web3 space. I'm getting to like Web3 more and more, just because it is broader. Like you said, if you talk about crypto or something, you can maybe just get into a specific application. But Web3, you mentioned DAOs, and you could talk about smart contracts. You could talk about distributed storage. And one of the elements there that was, well, the reason why all this stuff came about was to give the opportunity for individuals to have more sovereignty over their financial lives. Like that's the start of this, right? To have sovereignty over your finances so that you're not completely dependent on a system that perhaps could break for whatever reason. And I think the missing piece to all of that, there was a missing authenticity, missing verifiability. There were certain things that was a component that was missing. And that's why I personally and our company got into self-sovereign identity. But I think even though self-sovereign identity, and I like the use of ID tech for category, I think it's very good. I do like the use of self-sovereign identity for certain other things, but I think sovereignty should not be a scary thing, whether you're a government, an organization, an individual, because having sovereignty in your context is powerful and is only going to benefit you. So it shouldn't necessarily be scary to think that, well, if people have sovereignty, I won't be able to govern and have oversight over what's happening. That's just not true.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think if there's one takeaway that I could sort of, if I wanted listeners to get one thing from my perspective here, it is that, totally agree. But that said, first of all, I don't think the problem most businesses are looking to solve is they want to make users more sovereign, right? That's just not on their list of OKRs and corporate goals. And so, and second, the only way for people to get more sovereignty is for, I'll be broad here, adoption of SSI to occur, right? If I have a wallet that gives me control of my data, but I have nowhere to use it because it's not accepted anywhere, then what's the point? Is that really sovereign? Well, maybe, but like if it's not very useful, I'm probably not going to use it. And so the sort of takeaway that I would convey is that the key to solving this problem and the key to adoption, the key to getting to a world where users are self-sovereign is building good products, solve problems for businesses so that they can adopt SSI, so that users can onboard and use these wallets or data stores or whatever to get access to the things they need more easily. We got to build products that solve problems for both users and businesses. And in order to do that, sometimes we have to meet them where they are and grow with them. I think self-sovereign identity, again, is an ideal. I don't know if we can jump all the way there from, current state all the way to end state where we want to be. We may need to meet users where they are and just build good products for them to solve their problems in a way that is compatible with self-sovereignty moving forward.
Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. To stay up to speed with future episodes, or to catch up on ones you may have missed, make sure to check out the SSI Orbit podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or wish to see someone in particular on a future episode, you can find me by searching Metzer Glode on LinkedIn or Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll get back to you. See you all next time.